dog is a plumber. He must be a boy. Although I must tell you, his favorite toy is a little play stove with pans and with pots. He really must like it. He plays with it lots. So perhaps he's a girl, which kind of makes sense, since he can't throw a ball and he can't climb a fence. But neither can Dad. And I know he's a man. And Mom is a woman, and she drives a van. Perhaps the problem is in trying to tell just what someone is by what he does well. Now that little poem I first heard when I was 5 years old. It came on an album called Free to Be You and Me, which came out in America in 1972. So now you know how old I am. My name is Erica Wagner, and I am delighted to be chairing this event on bringing up boys. And when I was asked to do this, that poem, which I hadn't thought of in a while, even though I myself have a boy, a nearly 14-year-old son, came back into my head about the ideas that we have, not only about boys, but of course about girls too. And so I'm delighted to introduce our illustrious panel so we can discuss this subject. What I'll do is I'll introduce them all, and then they'll each speak for a couple of minutes about the subject, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves, but there will be plenty of time for questions from all of you. So first we have Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, who is an award-winning journalist, author, and broadcaster, who writes regularly for many publications and is a weekly columnist for The Independent. She's a part-time professor of journalism at Middlesex University and governor of the Royal Shakespeare Company. She has been a winner of the George Orwell Prize for Journalism, and her books include No Place Like Home, After Multiculturalism, and Mixed Feelings, The Complex Lives of Mixed-Race Britons. She co-founded British Muslims for Secular Democracy in 2004. She's just finished a new book on England and the East to be published later this year, and she is a keen cook, wifey, and mom, she says. And then we have Nick Makoha, who is a writer and poet who was born in Uganda and has lived in Kenya, Saudi Arabia, and is now in London with us. He represented Uganda in the Poetry Parnassus as part of the Cultural Olympiad. He is the director of the Youth Poetry Network, which facilitates dynamic workshops in schools, and he is resident artist of Spoke Lab, for which he developed his show, My Father and Other Superheroes, which debuted to sold-out performances at both the 2013 London Literature Festival and at the Southbank, and a special Father's Day performance at the Unicorn Theatre, and a national tour, I think, will be launched this year. Carrie Paechter is Professor of Education and Head of Educational Studies at Goldsmiths, University of London. Her research interests include gender, power, and knowledge, how children construct and understand their identities. She's particularly interested in young people's embodied identities and how they are perceived by the public and the media. Her most recent books are Being Boys, Being Girls, Learning Masculinities and Femininities, and Girls in Education 3 to 16, which she edited with Carolyn Jackson and Emma Reynolds. And finally, Abi Moore is the co-founder with her sister Emma of the Pink Stinks campaign. Begun in May 2008, Pink Stinks confronts the damaging messages that bombard girls through toys, clothes, and the media, and runs targeted campaigns aimed at creating positive changes in the products, messages, labeling, categorization, and representations of girls. In 2012, Pink Stinks won a Mumsnet sponsored award for promoting body confidence in children. She is also a freelance filmmaker working for charitable organizations, NGOs, and corporate clients. She has 2 sons, aged 11 and 7, and 1 husband. So please welcome our panel.
Hello, it's a privilege to be here at the festival, and in particular to be here talking about boys, which isn't something that we usually do. Although our campaign has always, in our opinion anyway, has always been about just as much about boys as it is about girls, because we think that children are not two different species, and that if things are better for girls, then they'll be better for boys, and vice versa. So I think you've got a good idea of the campaign if you haven't heard of us already, but we've had a lot of successes, and we've had an interesting journey and a very interesting time in the press, which not all of which has been very pleasant. But we've also got a lot of support from mums and dads, and from children themselves, and from teachers, and all sorts of people actually. So one thing that has been interesting, other than the reaction to us as women daring to speak out about these things, is that from the very beginning, one of the questions which we have always been asked is, well, what about boys? And we actually joke between us, and we sort of say it in, oh, what about boys, in this kind of way, because it's actually become a bit of not a tedious question. It's just the first question really that people ask, and and of course it's an interesting question, but we've always had to be focused on. We've always had to be focused because we do this in our spare time. We don't get paid to do it. Blah blah. However, we have always, like I say, we have always thought about it, and particularly, not particularly me actually, but Emma and I've got this is Emma here, by the way, because I keep looking at her. We're twins, and we have got 2 children each who are roughly the same age, and she has got 2 daughters and I've got 2 sons, and we kind of joke that we have this little experiment going on, which we didn't do on purpose, or we couldn't possibly have created it if we even tried, but we did. So it has, and it's actually where our campaign came from, because we noticed the difference between the stuff that was filling our houses. Emma's house, in the early days anyway, was full of pink and princesses and not Barbies, but castles and what have you. And of course mine was full of trucks and building stuff. And my mother is a feminist, and we've been brought up as feminists, and we are proud feminists. But my God, somehow it felt that the wool had been pulled over our eyes, and this stuff was, giving messages to our children, and that's where our campaign was born from. And we focused on girls because we found it particularly worrying, the obsession with pretty and prettiness and beauty and what have you, and passiveness. Now, in terms of, I'm very aware of the time, I've got to be quick. We think that people often say to us, well, they grow out of it, it's ridiculous, you're making a storm in a teacup, etc., etc. We've heard it all. But like David Attenborough, we think that, and he's obviously talking about lions and orangutans here, but we think that play is a very serious business, because it instills at a very early age messages and ideas within our children, and we know that those messages get carried on and internalised, if you like, as kids get older. And a lot of the girls in particular that we hear from do talk to us and about the pressure that they're under at school to look a certain way, and I'm talking about young girls here, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. And then obviously the problems go on. But what we do know, and what we focus on in our campaign, is marketing. And here is an example. This is a Wordle. I don't know if you've ever seen a Wordle, but these are words that are used to describe toys which are marketed towards girls. Obviously love stands out, and magic and glitter and parties and what have you. And for boys, these are the words. So battle is a word that comes up all the time. And so I think going forward, we are working on some things which I can't really announce now, but which are going to be much more focused on boys. So all of those people that have said, what about boys? all million of them, we can hopefully give them something a bit more. But this is very interesting and should really be quite concerning. Oh, sorry, you're not hearing me. Is that better? And certainly needs to be challenged. And our organisation and others, and there are other people, other organisations who are now working on this, are challenging it. But we do need support, and we do need to do our homework really. But this is very quickly. How am I doing on time? Pretty good. Okay. This is from a professor at Cambridge University, and it's about happiness, which is of course what we all want for our children. Apart from being fed and having somewhere to live, these are the things which time and time again are mentioned by all sorts of people as to what makes them happy. And what we see in the marketing towards children, girls and boys, is that they're actually at odds really with what we see here. And that is something that we need to be aware of and something that we need to challenge. And I think I'll finish with a quote from an anonymous marketing executive who himself said that the rate at which mass marketers encourage children to consume frightens me. I find it obscene. I guess what we need to focus on is how and what it is that they're marketing towards our girls and our boys, and we need to challenge it.
Hi, I'm really pleased to see so many children here. It's really nice. So I'll start with that. And I didn't say when I sent my blurb about myself, and I sent my sort of professional blurb. So you know, I have two sons. One of them's 19, the other is 16, and I have no husband, although I did have one once. Okay, lost. So there are three key things I want to say at this stage, really. One is that children are not raised in a vacuum. What goes on in the family is supported or challenged or undermined by whatever goes on elsewhere, and particularly by the peer group. Once children go to nursery, particularly if they go around 3, that's just when they're really beginning to think about gender, and they're very muddled about it. And what they meet is a peer group that is also very muddled about it, and will have very stereotypical ideas. And that's because what children are trying to do at that age is they're trying to show that they are part of that community. If I'm a boy, I want to show that not only that I am part of the community that's going to become a man, but I know that I know that. And part of what they do when they do that is they behave in very stereotyped ways so that they're demonstrating I'm a boy or I'm a girl. So that's the first thing. What you do as parents is only part of the story, and you need to be aware that what you do as parents is going to be affected by so much else. At the same time, what goes on in the home does really influence children from a very, very early age. We know that children of 9 months old will look at what's going on in the household, and they will associate what the things the man does and the objects the man does things with all men. And they will associate the objects that the woman in their household, if they're living in a heterosexual household, does with all women. To the extent that if daddy likes coffee and mummy likes tea, they think men only like coffee and women only like tea. And what that means is that, of course, if you have a fairly gender-segregated household, as many heterosexual couples did, including myself, your children will learn that and they will generalise from it. And there are other things. The Wordle is very interesting, but did you know that parents of preschool children will talk more to girls using emotion words? They use more emotion words in conversation with girls than they do with boys, which is, one reason why girls end up knowing more emotion words. They're more likely to do rough and tumble play with boys. So again, boys have more, they get more physically skilled quite early. And the third thing is really that, as I was saying, children go through phases of sex stereotype behaviour, gender stereotype behaviour at key ages, and that's because they're trying to work out who they are. And the real key ages for this are sort of between 3-ish and 7-ish, and then again when they're teenagers. And you are really up against it at those times, particularly in the early years. In the middle, they become much more gender flexible, and so you see the sea of pink that we do see in nursery schools. It dissipates by the time they go through primary school, partly because they're trying to show that they're grown up and they don't want to wear pink anymore. So what's going on in the home, what's going on in the school, what's going on in the peer group, and what's going on in the media all interact. But they do all have effects, and they have effects on girls and they have effects on boys. And we need to think about those as parents, as educators, as members of the public or members of the media, when we're thinking about what we're doing in relation to young boys.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, just for some of the people standing there, if you do want to sit, there's seats over there just so that you don't get tired, so that's just for you. All right, cool. And you can walk across, I'm not going to be embarrassed. But
I don't step on the babies. Exactly.
Yeah, so my name, as you know, my name is Nick Makoha. I'm aware I'm the only male here. I'm not intimidated by that. That's pretty much how my life has been. I was raised by my mother. My father was in and out of my life, but I can't put him into the kind of stereotype that we have, I guess, in the West, where black fathers are bad. He wasn't that. It was just that they just didn't stay together. But it had an impact on my life, and I guess now that I have 2 children, I have a daughter who's 9 and a son who's 3. It was a concern that was in the background. How do you raise boys? Until I had one, and then now it's a concern that sits in the foreground. And yesterday was my birthday, and I think the nicest. Oh, thank you. And the nicest thing. I mean, there were many nice things that happened yesterday, but hey, how you doing? But the nicest thing, one of the nicest things I saw yesterday. It probably means nothing to you, but it was my son. I've given him one of my aftershaves because he sees me every day put the aftershave on, and I said, right, you can have this one, and he's got a memory like an elephant, so he always goes, Daddy, can I put my aftershave on? And he's getting taller. That's the other thing I've noticed. Like, how do they grow so quick? But he picks it up and he takes pride in showing everyone that he smells nice. So what that makes me aware of is that I influence my son in many ways. So there are things that he sees me do that I don't see of much importance, that to him are of significant importance. So, and I should remember this because I remember when I lived with my dad in Saudi Arabia, one of the nicest things that made me feel close to him, because my dad was a doctor and he doesn't really talk much, and when he does talk, it's usually about politics, was when he would drop us off to school, and he would have Old Spice in the car, and he would give it to us, because, kids can stink, can't they? And he would spray it on us. And it's funny how the cycle has come back around. My son wants to spray my aftershave on him. And so one of the things I'm radically becoming aware of is that things I do greatly impact my son, more so. And when I walk into the communities I move in, I'm a writer, so a lot of times, as a black writer, say, going into a school, they'll say, could you talk to our boys? As if I'm supposed to just know. Hey, you want me to talk to the boys? But I mean, I am pretty good at it, but what I've realized raising my son, it's much more of a consequence to me, because I want the best for my son, doesn't everybody, or their daughter. What I realized then is that actually one of the things that came across in your conversation over there is that I have to learn my emotions again. So emotions I had when I was a boy, emotions I had when I was a single man, aren't necessarily the right emotions to bring into a loving relationship. They're not the emotions a boy needs to learn, or a girl needs to learn, or a partner needs to learn. And I've had to unlearn some emotions that really don't have place inside of a loving relationship. They don't have place inside of mentoring. So one of the languages I've had to learn is the language of sorry. And sorry not from the point of a mistake, but sorry from showing, for example, I have to show my daughter and I have to be able to show my son that it's okay to make mistakes. Daddy gets things wrong. Otherwise, you know, when you're raising these boys and they're seeing you do things, they assume that you are the law and that this is how they're done. You know, but one of the most powerful exercises I do, and it's not an exercise, it's what we do, is like, a lot of times my son does naughty things, he's hilarious. It's naughty, but it's hilarious. But I have to teach him, and sometimes he's quite rude to his sister. And she's very loving and she's quite accommodating, and recently she's been getting frustrated about it. And I have to keep reminding her, look, he's only 3, he's not 9. But I have to teach him how to say sorry, because it's a language that if he doesn't learn that, he will assume that he has a way of being with around women, that he can be rude, he can be arrogant, he can be, you know, and you know, there's something that that's been said a lot. I mean, I was at the BAM festival and it's been said here, it's about feminism, and I think we need to address that. So feminism exists because there's an imbalance in how men and women are to one another. So feminism no longer needs to exist when the balance is right. So we're all feminists if we're living in a world that has imbalance. And so what we should be moving towards is a world where we don't need feminism because things are just happening naturally, you know. So I didn't understand that, maybe to articulate it, you know. When I was younger, I was just like, I'm for my mom. Women are important. Whereas now, you know, I think having my daughter, it made me realize actually, man, there's ways that you are, Nick, without even realizing behaviors I've learnt. This is just not going to cut it. So, you know, when a man shows his temper, to him it's almost like a right. I'm angry, you know. But to a woman, you know, especially usually the people we're showing our tempers to are our mothers, our partners, our children, and that translates, you know, in a totally different way. You know, so a lot of times my partner's told me this. You know, she goes, "You've got to be aware of what you're giving across." I think the importance of, I don't know if I'm helping here, I don't know if I'm making sense.
You are, yeah.
Alright, so, because you're just looking like this, so I don't know if you're thinking but I mean, and also the thing is I think that you said something quite poignant as well, is that, you know, just before we started, is that, you know, the world that we live in now, if I was a father maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we're living in a different dynamic. The world is moving a lot faster. So I'm not only protecting my child from ways that I've learned that aren't correct. We're living in a world that's moving at light speed. You know, where children are growing up at a rate that is just not right. They're not actually allowed to have a childhood. And also what you're saying about Pink and all of that, they're living in a childhood that's kind of a fantasy childhood. And this fantasy childhood, because of the internet and the speed at which things move around the world, they're living in a fantasy, and you have to really draw them out. And if you allow them to live in that fantasy, what they lose, the compensation for that, what they lose is confidence. So a lot of times what you're seeing in boys and girls is a lack of confidence. And I find I invest a lot of time trying to instill confidence in my son. I mean, they're quite confident anyway in playful and fun, but I'm talking about a confidence in being with other people, a confidence to be themselves, a confidence to share when they feel sad or happy or whatever. So a very good example of that is, and I'll leave it at this just for now, but a very good example of that is when my son Aiden goes to sleep, a lot of times he's really exhausted, and I want him to express his feelings. So a lot of times I'll tell him, do you feel tired? You know, because he just had enough of the world, like he's exhausted, he doesn't want to but he doesn't know how to communicate that. And I'm trying to give him the permission to communicate vulnerability. And I think that's something that we don't often give boys particularly. I've just come from a workshop where one boy who was very rude to me literally swore at me in the session. And when he went out and had a talk with another one of the facilitators, what he wanted to communicate was he didn't have confidence, you know? And so the flip side of a lack of confidence is this aggression that we're seeing in a lot of young boys, because they don't have the ability to say, hey, you know what, I really don't know how to do this. I'm sorry, I don't know how to communicate this. You know, so one thing I want for my son is that strength of character to be vulnerable. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
It was difficult when you were last. So I had my son so long ago that it almost feels to me like a different world, a different planet. He's in his mid-30s. I also have a daughter who's 21, about to be. But because I'm a journalist and I do a lot of work on families and parenting and children and teenagers, I'd like to kind of broaden this a little bit, because in some ways you would never have got a father speaking like we've just heard, even 10 years ago. You just would not. We are in a kind of, I don't know where we put it in, what words we use, but certainly the father of my son, my ex-husband, was, I suppose it was in the 70s, the beginning of the new father. And he was a brilliant father. And he did the washing up. And he did all that. But then he walked out. So he was only a temporarily good father. And actually, what that taught me, really taught me, how much a good father who becomes a temporary good father, how much more that father is missed. See, my father was absolutely of no consequence to me, really. These dads of their time hardly spoke. If they spoke, they were angry, they were authoritarian, they decided what you were going to do and be. All they wanted was respect, unearned respect. We don't get that, more or less. Of course, there are still families where this goes on, but as a trend, we've moved from that. I'm very glad. Then there was another generation where it became very instinctive that dads thought of themselves as active parents. But I remember thinking the night he went off, oh my God, I'm going to get tearful after all these years even. Who's going to read him Winnie the Pooh tonight? It's his dad who does it. That's what he does. He's gone. He's gone 80 miles away now. So for me, the important thing is that we have come a long way. So boys are, and girls, daughters, are experiencing a different kind of manhood. But I fear that because other behaviors haven't changed quite as well, and because also there's a kind of, I don't think there is such a thing as progress, whether we're talking about race relations or feminism or anything. We go forward and then we tumble back, and then sometimes you tumble back to an even worse place, and then you kind of go forward. And I think at the moment, I mean, just last 2 or 3 days, there was an article and a program about young boys, very young boys, not understanding the meaning of consent in sex.
Yesterday.
Yeah? Now, I thought this was extraordinary. They're not bad kids. They actually don't understand when a girl says no, that's what it means. And that is because, I don't know if any of you saw the wonderful film recently made by the director Biban Kidron, which was in
real life.
Yeah, and I've got an article about that, but how it's affecting young boys in particular, the whole way they relate to what's out there in the ether, on the web, and how that's distorting not just their relationship with their sisters and their mums and everybody else. It's kind of the pornification of their very young minds, but also how it's completely taking away the vulnerability, all that thing we all want for our boys. So there are forces out there which I'm more and more aware of, which just weren't there when I was raising my son. At that time, parents, relatively speaking, had much more power, is the wrong word, but influence over how you raised your child. I look around, boys so fast become men, very fast. The statistics are horrifying, of depression, of suicide, of all of this. There is a lot of aggression among very young men, and it's not only in the underclass or wherever, it's in almost every level of society. And there is a lot of, I don't know, not knowing their place in a very different world. So we as parents, grandparents have to think about that. I also think that in certain cultures, including mine, and I would say that about my mother, boys are loved too much. boys I loved so much that they begin to think they are gods. And they do not have to do anything in return. They do not have to love, they do not have to care. And it's very complicated if you're a feminist. This is a mother bringing up a son to think he can behave as he wishes towards females, including sisters in the house. That's a big question. You know, how are we going to address this? And the final point is, and this is just in passing, two things. I was looking up all the advice. At least when I was raising my son, I wasn't drowning in advice. I do think that kind of is now so out of control that there is no instinct left. You know, you have to know everything from somebody else. And here's a bit of advice I picked up this morning. To show your young boy responsibility, quote, ask your preschool child to bring you a spoon so you can stir the pancake batter, and assign your school child a task to take care of a pet. And that will make them responsible. I'm sorry, this is just rubbish. You know, it's just rubbish. Don't listen to any of this. Do not listen to any of this. And final point, young women, and perhaps women of my generation, we have to look at who are the men we fancy. Actually, we don't fancy the gentle, you know, poetic, sensible, sensitive, lovely men. Change, because these boys are going to grow up to those men. Don't buy 50 Shades of Grey. Don't go for the Christian Greys. Actually learn to appreciate the men we want our boys to be. Thank you.
Places that we could go from there. I have to say, speaking, when there's so much we could talk about, something that Nick said made me think of something. What you were talking about, your son and aftershave. Now, it depends on how we model for our children, because actually my son, who is nearly 14, now he shares my perfume. But he is aware, right? It's all a conceit. He's aware that the bottles that I buy are marketed for men. There isn't really any difference. That's what I happen to like. He feels comfortable with this. I don't think that he would. We've never discussed it. If I was wearing something that was, I have a bottle of my mother's old perfume, he doesn't wear that. So those sort of, you know, clearly we can kind of blur those boundaries, but in this commercialized world, how do we give good models to our sons and our daughters too? You know, what, I'd start with Abi, what solutions have you found?
I think solutions are quite elusive. I think that I think for me, having boys, I was quite surprised to have boys, I have to say. I'd always had this, imagined I'd have girls, so maybe because I am one, it was, you know, when they said it's a boy, I was just, really? And then they said it again. I think, you know, I like the idea of let's start appreciating the men who we want our boys to turn into. I love that as an idea. It's kind of funny, and you're right. You know, there are things that I do want my boys to be like, but I guess what I've done is to myself to understand what it is that is affecting them, and you know, there are little things. There was one time when my son Ziggy, who's 11 now, but he was about 8 at the time, said to me, "Why?" I got in the car to drive, and he said, "Why are you driving Daddy's car?" And it was my car. And I thought, I'm so lazy. It's because I always get in the seat because I'd rather sit and play on my phone than drive. And I actually started driving more. After that, I thought I must start driving more. Now, we live in a house where my husband is a carpenter and fixes kitchens and things, and I do loads of cooking, and it just is the way that it is. But I guess I want them to be as free as they can be to be who they want to be, but absolutely be understanding what the pressures are as well, and talking to them about it when they see them. And with our campaign and focusing on marketing, it is it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere, the messages that they are getting. So any time that I can at least kind of shift the way they may be looking at something, I will. And it is difficult. I mean, I spend a lot of time, they sit and watch TV and they watch these American things on Disney Channel, and I cringe, and I think I really need to sit down and watch these with the guys and say, why do you think that girl's behaving in that way, or why do you think there's one boy wearing glasses, or what do you think about the black boy, or whatever. Then they're full of stereotypes, these shows, and I don't do it enough, I have to admit, because I'm really busy and I'm running around doing 20 million things. But if there's, but if we can, I had a conversation with them about Star Wars. I love Star Wars. Emma and I grew up, we were just so crazy Star Wars. These days, it's a boy, it seems, a boy's thing, it's boys' Lego, whatever. Although Ziggy seems to think it was in black and white when we watched it. But we had a conversation about Leia and about why she was the only female character, but wasn't Leia kind of quite cool as well? And I had to force them to watch, what's the second one? Empire Strikes Back, where she's particularly good in that. And they did have to admit that she was quite cool at the end. But I guess what I'm getting at is just the just whenever you can, just try and shift a little bit of their thinking. And you can't, the stuff that they talk about drives me insane, but I don't know. We have to do tiny bits, I guess, but without saying this is wrong and this is right. They have to find their way.
Can I? Yeah, can I? I was actually very proactive, but I also struck lucky, so I think the answer actually is have a couple of older girls. I was very lucky. I have stepdaughters, and the age gap between my youngest stepdaughter and my older son is 5 years. So by the time my children were beginning to get very stereotyped or getting to that age, their older sisters had got beyond that. So I was being incredibly proactive in as much as when my children were young, for example, boys' clothes were unbelievably boring. They came in green, dark red and navy blue, and I went out and I basically put my children in flowery leggings and pink tops, and I just sort of got on with it. I dressed them in clothes I liked to see, okay? And I sent my younger child, who has hair very like mine, and which I didn't cut for a long time because it was actually losing its curl, to nursery, to day nursery in bunches. And my older child had long hair, and he liked having long hair, and he actually quite liked the fact that everybody thought he was a girl. It was quite, he thought it was quite funny by the time he was about 3. And so, but what it meant was that, when they wanted to wear gold nail varnish, and I put gold nail varnish on them, their older sisters were not going, "Ew, that's only for girls, you can't have that as ours." They were going, "Yeah, gold nail varnish, right on." And they sort of got the gender bending thing a bit. And so actually my sons just grew up feeling that the big kids that were important in his house, which were his older, their older sisters, approved of what they were doing. And so that gave them a lot of power when they went to school, and they got a bit of teasing for wearing flowery socks and gold nail varnish, and they just carried on. I remember my older son, when he was about 5 or 6, saying, "Well, I know I get teased for wearing gold nail varnish in the playground, but I'm going to wear it because it's really beautiful." So I think, you can get totally proactive about that sort of stuff. That said, for various reasons, we had a very stereotypical household in many, many ways. I absolutely share your thing about being married to a carpenter. You know, the real problem for us was that we could both work the drill, but only I could work the sewing machine. And so we ended up with this division of labour that was just, you know, it was convenient. And so my children did, yes, just like Yasmin, as Yasmin suggests, grow up with me running around after them, and they still sort of expect it. It's been very good for the old one going to university. But at the same time, they're flexible in other ways. And they're particularly flexible about who they can be and what they can like and what they can wear.
I think on that note, I'm afraid it is amazingly 4 o'clock and we're going to have to call a halt. Clearly, there's much still to discuss. Thank you all so much for coming. And